what is going on in the last 48 hours, 24 hours, what was happening. The United States was basically focusing on the city of Bandar Abbas, and they struck the exit and entrance of a tunnel, which is so important, one of the most important tunnels. They hit both sides in order to make some sort of problem for the tunnel. And the footage that came out today, it shows that the Iranians have already started and they're opening the tunnel. And the other point for them was the bridges. They're trying to isolate. The strategy is to isolate the city of Bandar Abbas, which they know, everyone knows that is of particular importance strategically for Iranian, naval program or Iranian naval base in the southern part of Iran. And the other attacks in Iran were, one of them was a Imam Ali missile base in Khorramabad, which is in the western part of Iran, and the maritime control tower in Larak Island in the southern, again, which was, the photo was shared by the Secretary of State, but by the Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. And the other one was the desalination plant. It was in the south of Iran. The United States hit that desalination plant, and we've heard some explosions in Bushehr, Darab, Khark, and Ahvaz in the western part of Iran. And in response, what was happening last night, Iran was somehow devastating the Iraqi Kurdistan. Looking at the mountain, it was all on fire. Everything was burning. Even you see the footages, you see the secondary explosions happening. I showed that to my audience last night. I did a video on that. And it means that they're hitting the ammunition depots in Iraqi Kurdistan. That was one of the. And today, as we talk, there are missiles. Here you see the sky in Jordan. You see at least 8, 9 missiles in Jordan. And they hit some targets there, and everything is burning there in Jordan. There are some reports in Kuwait as well, as you see here, that some areas, American bases or some military areas, are burning in Kuwait. And Iran started for the first time to send some sort of warning to the United States and to the Kuwaiti government by hitting some targets, desalination plant and power plant in Kuwait. This is what was happening so far. What is your understanding of the current phase of the war?
Oh, the areas that surround Bandar Abbas, the port of Bandar Abbas, these are all civilian sites that they bombed. Ordinary bridges, tunnels, and everyone who was killed, every single person who was killed were locals, and they targeted them on purpose. They saw cars crossing the bridge. They bombed the bridge while the car was crossing. So they wiped out a family. A man was a truck driver was passing across the bridge. They bombed him. So the American pilots or those who are firing the missiles, they're seeking to kill ordinary people as they launch these attacks. And the way in which they're, and except for the Imam Ali missile site, most of the sites that they've struck were civilian targets. And they just don't have any capability of creating significant damage to Iran's military, because Iran's military is well protected, as we've discussed many times before. The control tower for that Hegseth showed was a civilian tower that had nothing to do with the military. But these people just like destroying out of spite. They want to hurt Iran. They want to hurt the Iranian people. They want to demoralize the Iranian people. They've struck desalination plants. And the reason why Iran, after a lot of patience, has now begun to strike desalination plants in Kuwait is for two reasons. One is Kuwait has been most of the strikes, the country that is most complicit right now in the attacks on Iran is Kuwait. They are giving the most assistance to the United States, and there's a huge U.S. presence there, and there's a large force, U.S. force there that is stationed there for a potential ground attack at some point. So one is because of what the role that Kuwait is playing. The second is because they've been targeting desalination plants, they've been targeting hospitals, they've been targeting children's hospitals, they've been targeting bridges and tunnels, all civilian, all the cars that you see stuck, they belong to ordinary people, people who work in factories going back home, people who are taking their kids to a hospital in another city. These are the victims of U.S. aggression. So, what based on what we're hearing from the Iranians, this the Iranians are going to begin hitting harder, and I think increasingly they're going to start targeting critical infrastructure because the Americans are striking Iranian critical infrastructure, and the Iranians want to make sure that they don't get away with it. So we have to remember, Iran did not start the war. Iran did not restart the war. Iran did not initiate escalation. But Iran has said many times, and I said this during the 40 days, the 40 days of war, the Ramadan war. I'm sure you recall, I repeatedly said that these countries, if this war escalates, these countries will be destroyed. These are tiny countries. They're deserts. Saudi Arabia is large, but it is also mostly desert. All of their key assets are right in front of Iran. It doesn't even, someone was saying they want to build pipelines. I mean, first of all, if they build pipelines, it'll take years. But the assets are here. They're still right in front of Iran. In other words, if they build pipelines through Syria or through Saudi Arabia to the Red Sea, all Iran has to do is target their critical infrastructure alongside the Persian Gulf. So they have to learn to live like normal countries. There's no solution for them to continue being U.S. proxies and allow the United States to use their land to kill Iranians, to use their airspace to murder Iranians, to destroy the country, to target desalination plants as they've done again last night in Iran. So I think within the next 2 or 3 days, we're going to see the Iranians hit harder and make it more painful for the United States and for those regimes that host their forces. We're entering the critical phase now. Iran is hitting the Americans very hard. It's been doing so for the last 6-7 days. Iranian missiles are very precise, more precise than they were in the past. They have excellent intelligence, and the Americans have given significant casualties, even though they're hiding them. But the casualties are high based on reports that the Iranians are getting on the ground in these countries. A lot of people apparently in these different countries are cooperating with Iran. In Syria, in Jordan, of course, in Iraq, in Kuwait, and elsewhere, Iran is getting lots of information. So, but this, so the Iranians are hitting hard, and that's why the United States is increasingly targeting civilian targets again, as we saw during the previous war. But this time, I think the Iranians are not going to show the sort of patience that they did during the 40-day Ramadan war.
The war is somehow expanding. As you mentioned, there is no country right now in the Gulf and outside of the Persian Gulf that was not hit by Iranian missiles. Saudi Arabia was hit, Oman was hit, Jordan is getting hit over and over the bases. We've seen some attacks in Syria attacking special forces, American special forces, at least their base in Syria was attacked by Iranians, which was some sort of sign. It seems to me that they're gonna hit. And we had the Iranian military advisor to the supreme leader of Iran saying the next phase is gonna be offensive. They're gonna go on offensive. It doesn't matter the political borders, doesn't matter as long as they're hosting American forces and their weapons, and those weapons are they're using against Iran. That's why they're gonna attack. And this is the next phase. And do you think, are we getting so close to that sort of all out war between the two sides, which finally it seems that it's getting worse? Because as you've mentioned, desalination plants, power plants, and energy facilities, it's going to be part of the new phase of the war.
Well, last night, General Mohsen Rezai, the leader's military advisor, came on television and had an interview with one of the
IRIB.
reporters.
Yeah.
Yeah, with one of the journalists in Iranian state radio and television, and he basically said that we are moving to a new phase, and that Iran is going to be hitting much harder. And from what I'm also hearing is that the escalation, the Red Sea, in the Red Sea, there's going to be escalation, and or at least in that region in general. And also in Iraq, there is a very large resistance force. The resistance force in Iraq is something that many people don't really um, appreciate how powerful and big it is. It is larger, significantly larger than Hezbollah. And of course, they have much better access to resources and weapons than Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is surrounded by US proxies, Al Qaeda in Syria, and the president and prime minister in Lebanon, and of course the Israeli regime. They've all surrounded Hezbollah. So getting weapons to Hezbollah is very difficult, as you've probably seen. Some weapons were to Hezbollah were intercepted by the Al Qaeda regime in Syria, and they displayed it for the public as if it's something to be proud of, doing the Israeli regime's dirty work for them. Again, this just every day we get this reminder that those people who supported the dirty war in Syria, they basically supported Israel, and they empowered Israel. And the Erdogan regime in Turkey has done more to help Israel than any other country in our region, due to his destruction of the country, bringing about the destruction of the country. But in any case, the Iraqi resistance is much better armed and has much better access to arms than does Hezbollah, even, or Ansarullah for that matter. And we saw the funeral in the holy cities of Najaf and Karbala, the many millions of people who participated in, like, I don't know, 50 degrees Celsius heat. So this is the reality on the ground, that right now the United States is fighting Iran for a week, not getting anywhere. I mean, if they think that they can, that because the bombing campaign against Iran seems to indicate that they want to carry out a land offensive. The pattern is that of an army that is preparing the grounds for a land offensive. But the Iranians are prepared for a land offensive. They've been preparing themselves for war with the United States for decades. We've discussed this on numerous occasions in the past. That's why Iran has these underground missile bases and drone bases and factories, because they knew that when the day comes, the Americans, if they're not well protected, the Americans will destroy all of them. So Iran's preparations for a land offensive take all these things into consideration. Iranian assets are deep, well protected, deep underground. Iran does not have any storage rooms for drones and missiles on the ground. They're all well protected. If they need to fire anything, they'll take it out of their the protected area, or some of their weapons are spread out so that the Americans would not be able to destroy them in a meaningful way. So as we speak, after a week of fighting, the Americans have not had any success. If they carry out a ground offensive, the Iranians are waiting for them. They'll let them take some territory, and then they'll just keep pounding them from everywhere. And in this weather, to me, it sounds insane for the Americans to carry out such an attack. But the Iranians are prepared. I mean, and the Americans have so far seen no success. And the devastation that we're seeing in Jordan, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, and in all the other countries, including Oman now, because of their foolishness in accepting U.S. demands under duress and assisting the United States, although it was under duress, but it has now put them on the list too, because Iran is not going to allow the territory of any of these countries to be used against it. So the United States has failed so far, but Iran has not expanded its missile strikes. It has not expanded its target list to include critical infrastructure. And Iran's allies have so far been relatively quiet. And they've been preparing themselves just as Iran has.
The assessment is that the United States is mostly using Jordan to attack Iran. You've mentioned Kuwait, but out of, putting the Kuwait aside, which country is participating and cooperating with the United States the most after Kuwait?
I'm not quite sure, but obviously Jordan is playing a very important role. But all of them are involved. I mean, Saudi Arabia's airspace and air bases are used by the Americans for attacking Iran. But so far, the Iranians have showed restraint towards Saudi Arabia, but that won't last long anymore. I think we're coming to the end of Iran's patience. I think that I know that none of them have refrained from cooperating with the United States. But I think there are multiple issues that Iran takes into account when it starts striking the American bases. But Kuwait has played an exceptionally dark role, and so has Bahrain. Of course, the U.S. base in Bahrain is huge. It's extraordinarily large. I've never seen it myself, but Iranians that I've spoken to say that it's a huge base, and that what the Iranians are doing is they're destroying all of the all of the assets that the United States have brought to the region that they could use if they want to initiate a ground offensive. So all of the Iranian missiles and drones are carefully, all of the missile and drone attacks are carefully designed to destroy piece after piece of the U.S. war machine.
Yeah. Here is the new statement by IRGC just moments ago. After several days of fighting against our armed forces and receiving crushing responses to Trump's aggression, and realizing that the Iranian armed forces had become much stronger than the first day of the war, instead of honorably accepting defeat and admitting to his repeated miscalculations, he took a new approach by fleeing the battlefield and attempted to hide his defeat in the military confrontations by committing war crimes. The United States tried to mend its position by carrying out destructive attacks on hospitals, bridges, railways, airports, ports, telecommunications centers, and so on, killing civilians instead of fighting on the battlefield like real men. Since there is no international institution to prevent these barbarities of the US military, there is no other way than to implement the Quranic command. So whoever attacks you, attack him in the same way that he attacks you. This is the statement, and I think it means that in the coming days there would be huge escalation. I don't know what is the plan on the part of Donald Trump, and how long does it take for him to understand the complexity of the region and the situation he's in. I the announcement of the ceasefire before all of this madness happening, I thought that they were understanding, they're getting to the point to understand, but it doesn't seem there is no point right now to understand that if Donald Trump gets the complexity of the issue in the region.
Yes, but we discussed this many times before. The Iranians always believed that the chances for the war reigniting were high, and the chances that the United States would abide by the MOU were very low. I mean, the Iranians were willing to sit back and give it a chance, especially since they were very smart and they used the MOU to quickly export huge amounts of oil, which they had in tankers that were stuck in the Persian Gulf. So they made a lot of money and they imported a lot of supplies, critical supplies for the country for the weeks and months ahead. So, but in any case, they were very skeptical, and they were preparing ever since. Right now, I mean, for a long time now, the armed forces are focused on uh, enhancing missile and drone capabilities, and you know, they're producing huge numbers of different types of missiles and different types of drones and expanding the underground bases. The focus for the armed forces is now on this, both the Revolutionary Guards and the army, and it's bearing fruit. The Iranians have huge quantities of all types of missiles and drones, and it can go on like this for a very, very long time. But since the United States is insisting on carrying out war crimes and striking hospitals and desalination plants and murdering civilians and bombing bridges and bombing tunnels, the Iranians are saying enough is enough. So, based on the Quranic verse, this is retaliation. In other words, the Iranians don't want to do this. They didn't start it. They waited a long time, just like they didn't start the war. I know a lot of people are saying Iran should put aside morality. I mean, the difference between us and them is morality. And so we would never put aside morality. But since the international community will do nothing except support this aggression and the war crimes, the Iranians, after patience, waiting a long time, they are now going to begin to retaliate. And the limited strikes on Kuwait are the warning shots that if you continue down this path, you're going to pay heavily for this, and you'll be hurt much more than we were. If we go back to the 40-day war, the Ramadan war, when the Americans and the Israelis began striking Iran's critical infrastructure, one of the key places that they hit was the South Pars gas field. And then Iran hit back very hard at Qatar and I think the Emirates and Kuwait. But the strike on Qatar was the most devastating. And that caused Trump to put out a statement saying, this won't happen again. So this retaliation or this threat to retaliation is basically a means to force Americans to discontinue targeting ordinary people. I mean, the Americans are really, I mean, this is Iran's deterrence because the West will support the genociding. They support the genocide in Gaza, the collective West, all the European countries, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all of them support the genocide in Gaza, which is ongoing, by the way. We shouldn't forget. They just bombed a funeral among the many other crimes over the past couple of days. One was bombing a funeral, killing 9 people, I think, at that funeral. So when they support genocide and when they support the genocide in southern Lebanon, then Iran cannot have any hope in Western countries putting pressure on the United States to end this. They would support it. NATO supports it. Not a single country in NATO condemns it. You don't even see Turkey condemning the United States. I mean, that's how inhumane NATO is. So the Iranians, in order to create deterrence, are saying, okay, we've had patience, and now we're going to hit back. So they carried out limited strikes on Kuwait to tell them that this is really going to happen if you don't change course. And from my understanding, if they don't change course, the Iranians will strike much more heavily at critical infrastructure.
Yesterday, we had multiple reports from the Strait of Hormuz. Some of these tankers were hit by mines, some of them were hit by drones and missiles from Iran. And the strait is becoming somehow the graveyard of these tankers that are trying to, you know, to pass through the Strait of Hormuz without having the permission. And what is the situation? What do we know about the strait, and how many tankers or ships are passing through these days?
Well, basically, what the Americans did during the MOU, except for when they initially they lifted the siege, was that they violated all of their commitments, every single one. Whether it was Lebanon, whether it was releasing stolen assets, whether it was stop threatening leaders, they expanded the sanctions regime. All of these were violations, and so then they went and what they wanted to do was through the MOU take control over the Strait of Hormuz in violation of the deal, and then refrain from carrying out their commitments and strangle Iran. That was basically their objective. What they couldn't achieve through war, what they couldn't achieve through siege, they wanted to achieve through deceit. But the Iranians weren't foolish. The Iranians, as soon as they saw the Americans and these regimes in the Persian Gulf create that southern, that corridor to the south, the Iranians warned them and then warned them again and then struck those tankers. So Iran is not going to allow the Strait of Hormuz to be controlled by the United States. Even if the United States creates a beachhead in Iranian territory alongside the Strait of Hormuz, Iran will still keep it closed because we're not living in the 20th century anymore. The Iranians can fire missiles from hundreds, if not well over 1,000 kilometers away from the Strait of Hormuz and do whatever needs to be done. The Americans seem to think that if they take the shores, that then it's over. No, nothing is over. The only thing that will change is that the soldiers that are alongside the Iranian shore, they're new targets for Iran, very close to home and much more easy to deal with. So the Strait of Hormuz will remain under Iranian control. The Iranians are have been very clear about that this is not going to change at any point in the future.